Hello, everyone. Today's session is going to walk you through the first project that is going to happen next week. Next week, our first project session will be fully online, so we will not be meeting in class for this. It will be fully online on Zoom. So your first project is going to consist of 5 questions. Let me correct this as well. So this project is based on IR202 lecture and recitation exercises for the first half of the semester. There are 5 questions marked as separate sheets at the bottom. So as you can see, at the bottom, you have separate sheets, and you will be answering each of them separately. The questions that I am doing here are only examples. In the actual project, your questions will be different. This is only meant for you as an exercise. The questions will not be the same. The questions will be different, but very similar. In question 1, you are asked to identify whether a particular research question can be answered by qualitative or quantitative research. Let's go to question number 1. So when you click on the sheet at the bottom, you're going to notice that each question has a different sheet. And this has to be done in these sheets. So are the following qualitative or quantitative research methods? Research case. Discourse analysis of ministry spokesperson statements from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs archives. So this research question consists of archives, and it consists of discourse analysis, which is a qualitative research methods. We did this in class. So this constitutes qualitative research methods. Mathematical modeling of developed nations' voting behavior in the United Nations. So when we say mathematical modeling, it means that quantity is involved and numbers are involved. And mathematical modeling, just like we discussed in class, is a quantitative research methods. Living with a tribe in Congo to gather information about their social practices. So living with any community is an ethnographic research method. An ethnographic research method is a qualitative research method. Interviewing the president of the World Bank Group on global inequality. When you're interviewing an elite, that research method is elite interview or elite survey method. And once you're dealing with an interview, you're dealing with textual data. And when you're dealing with textual data, that is a qualitative research method. Regression analysis of the relationship between military spending and battlefield performance of 20 nations. Regression analysis is a statistical research method. And we are dealing with military spending, which is a quantitative data, and battlefield performance, which is also quantitative data of 20 nations. So this is a quantitative research method. Process tracing how Germany, Britain, and France entered World War I. Process tracing is a qualitative research method, and it follows qualitative data. Conducting a survey of 3,000 respondents to infer their voting behavior in the upcoming elections. Surveys are quantitative research methods. Computing the likelihood of a 1% increase in GDP causing a 2% or 3% increase in military spending. So likelihood estimation is quantitative, and we're dealing with 1% increase of GDP and increase in military spending. These are both quantitative data, and this is a quantitative research method. Ethnographic fieldwork of the communication practices of NATO officials deployed in Poland. So when we're doing ethnographic fieldwork, it means that we are going to observe them through qualitative methods. We are assessing their their communication patterns. So this is a qualitative research method. Counting the occurrence of trade, investment, and tourism-related keywords in an IMF statement. So we get an IMF statement and we count how many times words such as trade, investment, and tourism appear in that statement. If we are counting, it means that we are using numbers. So this is a quantitative research question. Identifying behavioral triggers of United Nations arguments by watching 30 debate session videos. So this is a tricky one. So we are going to identify behavioral triggers. So what makes officials angry? What makes officials agitated? What makes officials calm? And we're going to do that by watching 30 debate session videos. Now, once we are identifying behavioral triggers of United Nations arguments, we are not counting, we're identifying. So we are really doing an interview-like data. So this counts as qualitative research methods because we're not counting anything. We're just identifying behavioral triggers, but we're not quantifying them. So this is the first question, and it's done. Question 2. Please indicate whether the type of each variable listed on column A. Let's go to question 2. For each of the following variables, indicate whether the variable is continuous, discrete, ordinal, or nominal. So I gave you a cheat at the bottom. Nominal data is used to label variables without any order or quantitative value. The color of hair can be considered nominal data. Ordinal data have natural ordering, where a number is present in some kind of order by their position on a scale. These data can be used for observation like customer satisfaction, happiness. Let me make these smaller so that they fit. But they don't have any mathematical value. Discrete data contain the values that fall under integers or whole numbers. The total number of students in a class is an example of discrete data. These data cannot be broken into decimal or fraction values. Continuous data represents information that can be divided into smaller levels. The continuous variable can take any value within a range. Okay, so let's practice. Importance of political party affiliation in survey questions. So the survey question will ask something like, according to you, how important is political party affiliation? Is it very important? Is it somewhat important? Is it not very important? So let's see. These are nominal data are label variables. It does not have any intrinsic or inherent order or quantitative value, but ordinal data does. So we can order this satisfaction, happiness. So in this context, importance of political party affiliation here is an ordinal variable type. Minutes spent reading yesterday. So you can read for 15 minutes. You can also read for 15.5 minutes. You can also read for 15.8 minutes. So this takes fractions and decimals. So that's why this is continuous variable type. Favorite type of book: fiction, nonfiction, or research. So in this context, this book type doesn't have any inherent ordering. So fiction is not greater than nonfiction, or research books are not inherently more important than, let's say, cooking books. So even if the question asks favorite type of book, which kind of suggests that this would be ordinal data. In fact, because these are labels without any intrinsic order or quantitative value, this counts as nominal data. Average amount of sleep in the last 7 days. You can sleep for an average of 6 hours, 6.5 hours, 6.8 hours. So this is continuous. Continuous. So let me. Number of countries that are run by a far-right government. Now, number of countries here cannot take decimals. We don't have half a country. We don't have quarter of a country. Number of countries that are run by a far-right government have to take whole numbers. So we can have 7 countries that are run by a far-right government, but we can't have 7.5 countries that are run by a far-right government. So this has to be discrete. Country of residence in Europe. So are you a French resident, an Italian resident, a German resident, or a Poland resident? These do not have an intrinsic ordering or intrinsic, sorry, I didn't do this, weights of adult men in kilograms. So let's do row 10. So weight in this context can take decimal points, of course. You can be 68.7 kilograms. So this is continuous data. Country of residence in Europe. Countries do not have an intrinsic ordering, which is why they are nominal data. Military spending in million US dollars, they can take fraction. So you can spend $110 million on military. You can also spend $110.85 million as well. So this is continuous data. Level of development of a nation: underdeveloped, developed, developing, or semi-developed. As you can see, these have intrinsic value ordering, which is why this has to be ordinal, because it has an intrinsic ordering. There is developed nations that are higher, underdeveloped nations that are slightly lower in the scale. Distance between Warsaw and Kiev in kilometers. This is also continuous because it takes fractions. This is the end of question 2. Let's move on to question 3. Please indicate the independent, dependent, and control variables that belong to research questions on column A. Let's look at question 3. There are 10 research questions below. Please indicate 1 independent variable, 1 dependent variable, and 1 control variable for each question. Please try to be creative with control variables. The biggest mistake I see with control variables is that, 1, most of you enter the wrong type of control variable, but also you add control variables that are too simple. Too simple in the sense that it is very common sense. So let's try to be a bit more creative with these. So, do democratic countries go to war more frequently compared to authoritarian countries? So what is our dependent variable? Likelihood of going to war, but each variable has to have a quantifiable value. So do democratic countries go to war more frequently compared to authoritarian countries? We have to, our dependent variable has to be number of wars fought over the last, let's say, 20 years. Depending on your research question, you can also perhaps do 10 years or 5 years. So that is our dependent variable. our independent variable. So do democratic countries go to more frequently compared to authoritarian countries? Democracy and authoritarianism is a regime type. A regime type identifies whether a country is authoritarian or democratic or hybrid. So our independent variable here are countries' regime types. Now, we need some control variables here. What would be other predictors of the number of wars fought over the last 20 years? So control variable here would be something, the number and intensity of pre-existing territorial disputes. This is countable, this is quantifiable. And if a country, regardless of whether it's a democracy or an authoritarian country, if it has a high number and intensity of pre-existing territorial disputes, even if it's a democracy, it would probably go to war quite frequently. So that is our control variable. Next question, does high growth lead to more income equality in developing countries? So here, our dependent variable is income equality or income inequality. So how can we measure income equality or income inequality? We did this in class. This can be GDP per capita, or it can be the Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is an econometric indicator of how equal or unequal a country is. In this context, you can use both. You can use GDP per capita, or you can use the Gini coefficient, which is a coefficient. It's a measure of inequality of a country. So in this context, what is our independent variable? Does high growth lead to more income inequality? So don't go and say something like high growth here, of course. What is the measure of high growth? It is percentage GDP change. So we are going to look at how a country's GDP changes since last year or in the last 5 years. When we were importing data from World Development Indicators interface, we explored this. So what is the measurement of growth? It is GDP change. If the GDP is changing negatively, it means that a country is shrinking. So the growth is negative. If the GDP growth percentage is high, meaning it's positive and it is, above 5%, it means that that country is having a high growth. So what you need to do here is that you have to look at the percentage GDP change, how much it changed over the last year. GDP change in the last 5 years. So you need to be as specific as possible. So in this context, what would be a control variable? Does high growth lead to more income equality in developing countries? So what other things would affect income equality or inequality in a developing country? So growth, yes, it affects the Gini coefficient, but there are other things such as taxation and subsidies that affect equality in a country. So you can say something like the level of taxation, whether rich people are being taxed more or poor people are being taxed more. That affects the level of development quite significantly. Or you can say things like pre-existing level of development. So if a country was already underdeveloped, it is very likely that high growth is going to lead to inequality in that country. Or things such as ethnic or religious disputes that would affect how the government taxes or how the government treats different individual communities in that country. So there are multiple control variables you can use with this. In this context, we can use the breakdown of taxation levels per income group. So we have to look at how different income groups are being taxed. So that is going to give you a control variable for inequality. Do countries that were colonized in the past have lower GDP compared to countries that weren't colonized? We did this in class, so we already have done the identical version of this. What is our dependent variable? Our dependent variable is GDP. So we have lower GDP, GDP level of the country. What is our independent variable? So some people make the mistake of writing things like colonized here. This is wrong. You have to be specific with this. You can say years spent under colonial rule. So this is one independent variable. It's countable. You can also measure things like intensity of colonial rule, but you have to measure this as well. You can say something like the size of the colonial army and years under colonial rule. The first one, the size of the colonial army, is going to give you the intensity of the colonial rule, and years spent under colonial rule is going to give you how long that colonial rule has taken place. So let's pick one. Let's pick years under colonial rule. And we're going to look at the effect of GDP level of a country. So what other things affect the GDP level of a country? Because we have countries that were colonized and spent years under colonial rule have a low GDP, yes, but we have also countries that spent a lot of years under colonial rule, but have high level of GDP. So what would affect whether a country has high level of GDP or low level of GDP? One control variable of GDP is existing natural resources. Maybe countries that have a lot of natural resources, despite the fact that they were colonized, can actually become very successful and have high level of GDP. They may have a lot of oil, they may have a lot of natural gas, they may have diamonds, they may have gold, and they might actually have a lot of GDP. Regime type is also very important. So whether a country is democratic or authoritarian, so democratic countries tend to have a higher level of GDP, even though they were colonized in the past, whereas countries that are authoritarian can have a low level of GDP, even though they weren't colonized in the past. So you can pick both, or you can come up with your own existing natural resources, and it has to be counted. So the volume and size of existing natural resources. A country may have oil, but a country may have a lot of oil, but it may have also not a lot of oil. The next question, does higher military spending lead to better battlefield performance in international conflicts? So here, our dependent variable is battlefield performance. But of course, this is not countable. We need something that is countable. What would be the indicator of battlefield performance? What would an indicator be so that we can say that this country has good battlefield performance? So probably win to loss ratio. How many battles it has won and how many battles it has lost. So let's say if it has 10 wins versus 3 losses, we can say that that is a good battlefield performance. If it only won 2 battles versus lost 30, for example, this is a bad battlefield performance. Win to loss. You can also count casualties. How many people, how many soldiers that have died in a battle. So casualties to kill ratio. So how many soldiers have this country lost? How many soldiers have it killed? It is also part of battlefield performance. Equipment and material loss versus adversary. So how many tanks, how many artillery, how much anti-air systems have that country have lost compared to the adversary. This could be a dependent variable. So what is our independent variable? It has to be military spending. But of course, don't go and say something like military spending. This is wrong. Don't pick something that is in the research question and copy and paste it here. Be specific. You can say national defense budget in US dollar terms. So you can say that $1.4 billion, this can be military spending measure. You can also say that military spending as percentage of national GDP. What percentage of their national GDP do they spend on the military? So we can find several control variables for this as well. So what would affect equipment and material loss compared to adversary? We can basically measure how professional that army is. But of course, it has to be counted. So you need to be something quantifiable. Years spent in training for personnel prior to deployment. So before they actually go into the battle, how many years do they spend in training? The level of training is an important driver of battlefield performance. Level of professionalization. So how do you measure level of professionalization? The number of officers in ratio to enlisted personnel. So if that military has a lot of officers, a lot of commanding officers in ratio to actual enlisted soldiers, it means that that military is highly professionalized. So this can be a control variable independent of military spending. Next question, does greater investment and trade between two countries lower the risk of war between them? So our dependent variable is very similar to the first. number of wars fought over the last 10 years or 20 years, something that has to be measurable between countries. So what are we looking for to determine the number of wars fought between them? Greater investment and trade between the two countries. So the independent variable would be something like trade volume in US dollar terms between those two countries, again, over the last 20 years, so that we can count this independent variable, and then we measure its effects on this dependent variable, number of wars fought over the last 20 years. So what would be a control variable? So we are interested in lowering the risk of war between them. So we can have, for example, control variables such as distance between the two countries. If those countries are adjacent, there would be a high likelihood of territorial border conflicts between them. You know, think of Turkey and Greece, or think of you know, any other country that is adjacent, Iran and Iraq, for example. Or you can think of Jordan and Israel. So countries that are adjacent to one another have a high likelihood of having border dispute. So if the distance between the two countries increase, the likelihood of actual war between them declines quite significantly. What would be other control variables in this context? The volume of tourism, for example, if those countries are sending and receiving a lot of tourists from each other, it means that they're going to have a lot of understanding, they're going to have a lot of mutual understanding between them. So the volume of tourism is one control variable. Student exchanges. If both countries have a high level of student exchanges between them, we can safely say that they're going to probably not have that much war between them. The volume of tourism measured as tourist arrivals in the last 20 years. So be specific. Don't be like tourism, just one word, and end it there. Do countries that received more than 50,000 refugees in the last 5 years more susceptible to far-right extremism? So our dependent variable here is far-right extremism. So how do you measure far-right extremism? Vote share of far-right political parties. Or you can do percentage increase in support for extremist ideas in opinion surveys. So voting for far-right parties or increased support in extremist ideas would be one way to measure this. So this is basically very easy. You can say that the number of refugees received over the last 5 years. So if the level of refugees increase, can we say that that country has a percentage increase in the support for extremist ideas? What would be the control variable? So when you look at the history of extremist ideas, economic inequality is highly salient in understanding the rise of extremist ideas. When you look at the beginning of World War II, beginning of World War I, you see that increased inequality is a big driver. If people are getting poorer, they're going to have greater demand for extremist ideas. How do we measure increased inequality? Changes in Gini coefficient over the last 5 years. So this is one possible measure. You can also decline in gross domestic products in US dollar terms over the last 5 years. So both count as good control variables in this context. Do countries that vote similarly at the United Nations have fewer bilateral disputes? So here the dependent variable is bilateral dispute. The number of diplomatic crises over the last, you can say 5 years, you can say 10 years, as long as it's measurable. So at the United Nations General Assembly, countries vote for certain international relations related events. So voting similarity. So how many times countries voted similarly at the UN General Assembly? And can we say, for example, that Turkey and Greece, over the last 10 years, maybe they voted 95% similarly or 90% similarly at the United Nations General Assembly. And then we go and count the number of diplomatic crises both countries had over the last 10 years. So what would be other diplomatic crises? What would be the determinants of diplomatic crisis? Similarly, we can say that distance between the two countries, it's a good control variable, because when you look at Turkey and Japan, they haven't really voted similarly in the United Nations General Assembly, but they also did not have any significant diplomatic crisis over the last 10 years. Same goes for Mexico and Egypt, for example. They don't really vote very similarly at the United Nations General Assembly, but they really don't have any disputes as well. So distance between the two countries, as in kilometers, for example. What would be another control variable of this number of diplomatic crises over the last year? We can say that pre-existing number of territorial or border disputes over the last years. We can say, for example, that a control variable would be the number of similar or different alliances that these countries are a member to. So whether they're part of Shanghai Cooperation Council or NATO or any other alliance, for example, that is a big determinant of the number of diplomatic crises. Are countries that have a far-right government more likely to increase military spending? So here, our dependent variable is national defense budgets in US dollar terms. Then we are going to look at their regime type, whether it's a democracy or an autocracy, whether they have a far-right government or left-wing government. Regime type can be inferred through one of the data sets that we discussed in class. We can look at their democracy scores. You can check this on Google. Either you can use Variety of Democracy Project score, or you can use Economist Intelligence Unit scores in that regard, and its effect on national defense budget. What would be a control variable that would also explain national defense budget? Military conflicts engaged over the last 10 years, for example. If a country has had a lot of military conflicts over the last 10 years, regardless of whether it's a democracy or an autocracy, it would have a high national defense budget. We can also say that civil wars or ongoing conflicts that country has in its borders or neighboring countries. Even if a country isn't fighting a war on its own, but its neighbors are, it would likely increase its national defense budget, despite the fact that it has a far-right government or a left-wing government. Do wars end in a stalemate, which means no side winning, have a greater likelihood of recurring into active conflict? So here, the question says, does a stalemate result in active conflict? So two sides are fighting, and then they end the war with neither side winning. Both sides just get tired of the war. Would that have a higher likelihood of returning back into active conflict? So our dependent variable is number of armed clashes after ending of conflict. So let's say a conflict has ended, but then both sides have started fighting. How many times have they actually started fighting? So number of armed clashes after the ending of the conflict is one very important dependent variable. And in this context, independent variable is the type of war termination, whether one side has total victory, limited victory, or no victory. So you can look at the type of war termination in this context, or you can count the number of casualties on both sides. So casualty ratio between two sides. If one side has lost more men compared to the other side, it means that it has lost more. If both sides have similar casualty ratios, it means that it's largely an equal and then you measure the number of armed clashes after the ending of the conflict. What would increase the number of armed clashes after the ending of the conflict? So if one side wins, you observe. If the other side loses, you observe. If both sides cannot win, then you observe as well. But what would be another explanation for the number of armed clashes after the ending of the conflict? So the number of conflicts in other adjacent regions. So maybe these two countries are not fighting, but other countries or other regions in the adjacent vicinity are also fighting. There are some parts of Southern America or Sub-Saharan Africa where this is the case. Two sides are fighting, they end the conflict. They don't fight necessarily on their own, but they start fighting with other countries in the region. So that's why the number of armed clashes after the ending of the conflict also increases substantially. So let's try to do these without me. Do countries that are more dependent on Russian gas choose not to criticize Russia's recent Ukraine war? What would be the IV and DV and CV for this? Does the length of the border between two countries increase the risk of territorial disputes? Can we say that longer a border between two countries, their likelihood of descending into territorial dispute increases? So try to do these on your own. So let's move on to the next question. Let's go here in question 4. So question 4 and question 5 are very similar. In the first one, you're going to do percentage CSV. In the other one, you're going to do continuous CSV. So let's go to question 4. You already have done this in class, so you already know how to do this. Please download GDP growth annual percentage data from the World Development Indicators of the World Bank. Please parse and format it on Excel with correct thousand and decimal separators, including fixing cell shift errors originating from country names concatenation problem. Please create a new spreadsheet and produce a line graph for Venezuela, Iran, Pakistan, Iraq, and South Korea. Then open up another new spreadsheet and create a world map showing 2021 GDP growth figures for all countries. This section you don't need. So you're basically going to do two things. You are going to right click here. You're going to say, not rename, you say insert sheet. So this sheet is going to be on the right-hand side. So you're going to rename this. You're going to say question 4, line graph. Then you're going to insert another sheet. You are going to say question 4, map. So what does this ask? Please download GDP growth annual from the World Development Indicators. Okay, so we go to the World Development Indicators, and from the database section, we have to make sure that World Development Indicators is selected. Okay. Then in the country section, we have to click on countries, so that you have 217. We have to click all, because we're going to build a map, so we need all of the countries. Series. So again, let's look what the question is asking us. GDP growth annual percentage. So I'm going to enter keyword GDP growth. And I type enter. So in this 115 drivers, I'm scrolling down. I need GDP growth annual. So I need to find this GDP growth annual percentage. Let's check the question. Is it? Yes, it's GDP growth annual percentage. It takes only 5 seconds to find it, so it's not really difficult. Time, I need time for all, because I'm going to use the line graph as well. So I have picked everything. I'm going to say apply changes. Please download this as CSV. Do not download this as Excel, because we won't be able to do what we need to do if you download it as Excel. We need CSV. Now we have the file. We're going to click on this. I'm going to open this up. So we have 2 files, a metadata file and a standard data file. Maybe so that you don't confuse what we're doing, you can rename this file and say IR202 projects question 4 data, so that when you take it to your computer, you don't confuse where this is. What you need to do is that you have to unpack this. So I'm going to drag it and drop it to my desktop. As long as that file is in the zip folder, you won't be able to process it. So here, what we need to do is, maybe it's a good idea to copy this instruction. And for now, paste it into question for line graph, because you are going to import a data set here. So you need to clear these all. So all of these have to go because you need to import data. So here, what we need to do is that we have to, on my computer, it's called get data, Power Query. In your Excel, it should be somewhere around data and get data or imports data. It should be a function that when you click on it, it should give you these options. Do you want to import Excel workbook? Do you want to import texts? Do you want to import XML? I want to import text CSV. And on my computer, I need to do browse. And I need to click on this IR202 project question for CSV, which I did right now. I have to click on get data. I need to click on next. In your computer, it should be something similar. So here it is automatically parsing things. So it should be okay. Your file origin should be UTF-8. Your delimiter has to be a comma. And I have to check whether everything is in good order. And I need to click on load. So it automatically brought the data for me. And as you can see, when you download the data like this through import, the cell shift problems that we dealt with before, for example, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Republic of Congo, in Arab Republic of Egypt, as you can see, when you import it like this, it doesn't really force you to do any concatenation or trim problem. So this is a neat trick. But I have to check again to see if there are no cell shift problems. So what I'm doing is that I am looking on column 1 country names. They will have to be the same. Column 2 need to be country codes. They all have to be country codes. Another way of checking this would be to go up to the last and look at year 2021. And they are the same as well. So what the question asks of me right now, so since it has already downloaded this here, I can get rid of question 4. What you can do is maybe to copy question 4 CSV parse percentages and rename this sheet as, oh, that file name is already taken. So let's see, question 4 CSV parse percentages B. And let's get rid of this sheet because we don't need it anymore. Permanently delete this sheet. Yes, I am sure. So here I need to copy Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, South Korea. So Venezuela, where's Venezuela? Okay, Venezuela. Here, Iran, Iraq, what else? Pakistan and South Korea. Okay. So I get Pakistan, I get Korea. So Democratic Republic of Korea is north. I need KOR, Korea, Republic of Korea. You can select multiple rows. Then you can select right click and copy them. Then you can go to question 4 line graph. You can right click on this and you can say paste. I also need the top row, country name, country codes, and so on. I need to copy them and I need to paste it into row 10. And now, since I have done everything, I can just delete them and shift the cells up. Sorry. I can just delete them. So I can copy them all and I can right click, cut, and I can just paste it above. I can select them all. When you double click on the intersection between two columns, it is going to fit this into the screen. So now what I need to do is a line graph. So I'm going to select all. I'm going to go insert. Let's see if it produces any recommended charts. It says I don't. So let's give it a shot with a line graph. So it did not immediately read everything correctly. So what we need to do is to get these fitted. So last time what we did was we tried to use the choose data source function, get data function. And the problem with that is that it didn't read the numbers properly. So what we need to do is that we're not going to use that method. We're going to use a more old school method. So this is an empty and blank page. What we have to do is that we have to go to our original CSV file and open it up on a different Excel sheet. Then we have to select all and copy the entire thing and close this, or maybe cancel. Let's not close this, but minimize this. And on the new sheet that I opened, question 4, CSV parse percentages, I'm going to paste them. And then I'm going to select column A, go to data, and do this using text to column functions. So delimited, because this is a CSV file, we're going to do next. This is a comma separated file. Then we go to advanced. My thousand separator is nothing. My decimal separator is a point. I click OK. I click finish. Now this is parsed properly. What we're going to do right now is that, as you noticed, there were cell shift errors. Now, in our class exercise, in 2 instances, I explained to you how to use the concat function and trim function in order to get rid of that cell shift error. So having fixed those cell shift errors, I'm choosing my 5 countries, Iran, Iraq, Korea, Pakistan, and Venezuela, to our new sheet, which is called question bar graph. And in order to make a graph, I need the top row as well, country names and country codes as well. So I'm pasting this above. So what we have here is country names country codes, series names, series codes, and years. I no longer need these three columns because I only need country names and years. So I'm going to say delete. And as you can see, those additional columns are gone. It starts with country name, 1960, 1961, 62, and it goes all the way to the end. Now, in order not to confuse Excel, I'm also going to delete the country names because it's only going to read these and read these in order to build a graph. I'm going to select all. I'm going to do inserts. Let's see if it recommends any charts. It does, but I'm not going to use them. I'm going to use the two-dimensional line graph. And as you can see, the x-axis is painted purple, so it's taking years from the above column. The country, the red portion, it's selecting the countries, and then the values are in blue, and it's producing this chart. So let's rename this chart as GDP growth percentage. So this is basically how you are going to do this bar graph. As for the map, we only need to copy country names, go and paste it on this map section. Then we only have to do the map for 2021 figures. We're going to copy that, take it to the map. We're going to paste this. So we only have country names and the last values for them. Let's get rid of this as well. So when I select them, I'm going to do insert, and I'm going to insert a map. It has messed up, so let me fix this. So just like I did in earlier versions, I'm going to select country names, and I'm going to select 2021 figures, and then I'm going to copy and paste them here. And with that selected, I'm going to go to insert, and I'm going to click on map. And when you do that, it is basically going to give you the map. If you have any problems with this, you can use the previous week's tutorial as well in order to be able to do this. So the final task that we have is very similar to question 4, but we are going to import a continuous file. So we need to download GDP current US data from World Development Indicators. So let's refresh this because we already have imported data. What do we need? GDP in current US dollar terms. This is not a percentage data. This is a nominal continuous data. So from the database, we want to make sure that World Development Indicators is selected. In countries, we need all countries selected. In terms of series, now let's check back GDP current US dollar. So we enter keyword for GDP current, and then scroll down to the GDP section, GDP current US dollar. This is what we want. Then select time, select all, apply changes, and then download it again as a CSV file. And I click on zip. For the sake of making this easier on myself, maybe I will rename this as IR202 first project question 5. And then I'm going to take this into here. And then let me open this up. Try to find this question 5. I'm going to copy this all. I will erase this. And then I will go to data. I will go to text. So before text to columns, I had to paste the whole thing here. So I had to go back here, copy, paste the entire thing here, do text to columns. This is delimited. Next, this is comma separated. Next, we go to advanced. So this is different than the previous one because here I have 1,000 separator. But in order maybe not to confuse Excel, I will still keep this nothing. I will not use 1,000 separator. And my decimal separator is a dot. And I go to finish. I will select all. And now I have everything parsed well. What you need to do here is to correct these Bahamas, Democratic Republic of Congo, things that you have already done. And then when you clean this, you will do exactly the same thing that you did previously. You need a question 5 bar graph. You need a question 5 map. And you're going to do these things on your own. So it's, I think, good exercise based on past week's tutorials. Try to do these on by yourself. So the exam questions are going to be very similar to these, but of course, the exact content of the questions will change. And when you're done, you are going to save this as surname IR202 first project and upload it on the LMS. Please use this exact file name because then it gets lost there. Write your surname and number here, and then save as frequently as you can. As I said, this is not your exam. This is exam preparation. This is to give you an idea of how your exam is going to be like. At the end of the exam, you're going to have multiple sheets. You're going to save this and upload this on the exam. So this week, we are not going to have a recitation. You only have to practice this exercise. So best of luck, and let our course assistant Azadeh know if you have any questions. So best of luck, good luck.